Good afternoon. I'm Nicholas Crandall. Nicholas Crandall.
Nicholas Crandall.
Nicholas Crandall. Nicholas Crandall.
Hi, I'm Clement Gendler. Clement Gendler.
Clement Gendler.
Clement Gendler.
Clement Gendler.
And I'm David Santo. David Santo.
David Santo.
And this is KB Radio.
Today's topic is isolation.
Ooh.
We will be looking into how dangerous and underlooked isolation really is.
So what is isolation anyway?
Well, let's not go into that just yet. I want to talk about a question that we asked many students of Scarsdale High School. We asked, how would you describe solitude in 3 words?
Sad.
Detached. Efficient, necessary, and beneficial.
Alone. Terrible.
Depressing.
Ravioli.
Typically, many associate isolation with depression, but some believe that it can actually be beneficial.
When asked if they had kids and a spouse, and they had a weekend alone, we had various responses.
I'd go fishing at Tropic Star Lodge in Panama.
Alone?
And catch black marlin. Yeah.
Just all weekend?
Yes.
That's your favorite thing to do?
Yes.
If you had a wife and kids, you'd just ditch them to go fishing?
Yeah.
Go to Vegas with a crap load of singles.
Would you be able to enjoy that for the rest of your life?
No. It would get boring.
How long would it take?
Probably about 18 days.
I'd probably sit at a computer doing nothing for 24 to 36 hours straight.
You wouldn't go on vacation or anything like that? You wouldn't go to a resort?
I mean, just a weekend alone isn't enough time for that, really.
While there are various responses, and some of which argue that solitude and isolation are beneficial,
There are also studies done to prove that isolation can be detrimental to one's health.
I know of one that might pertain to isolation.
What are you talking about, Nicky?
It's called
The Pit of Despair.
I've never heard of it. What is it?
The Pit of Despair is a controversial experiment done in the 70s conducted by Harry Harlow.
Studying the effects of total isolation on rhesus macaque monkeys as newborns, children, and adults. It consisted of placing monkeys of all ages into individual cages surrounded by steel walls and a one-way mirror.
Separated from his mother since the day of his birth. Literally, his life hangs by a thread, a soft cheesecloth pad that is his only companion, his only comfort.
They were in cages for 30 days, 6 months, and a year.
In each individual study, the monkeys broke.
Wait, they just broke?
Yeah. In the first 2 to 3 days, the monkeys tried to climb out, but afterward they started to huddle in a corner. The monkeys that stayed in the cages for 30 days were described as
Enormously disturbed.
and they were much worse after a year of being in the cages.
How were they much worse?
They barely moved and didn't explore or play. They were incapable of having sexual relations. Also, it turned them psychotic. Almost all of them never recovered from the isolation.
What does that mean?
Could it get any worse than that?
The worst part about this is that half of the monkeys that were in isolation for a full year starved and or killed themselves.
What was this study called again?
The Pit of Despair.
Alright, gotcha. Wait, is this study suggesting that this could happen to other species?
Exactly.
Like humans, perhaps?
Yeah, that's the main concern that arises from this experiment.
Well, if we replace the monkeys with newborn children, would we have a similar effect?
Precisely. Even if the child wasn't a newborn, it would still have Brobdingnagian effects on their social development.
I'm still confused about something. What would the chimps do to each other when they were put back in their group?
They either didn't interact with each other or were tormented by the other monkeys that physically beat them up.
I'd imagine that made the monkeys feel even more isolated.
That sounds exactly like what isolated humans would do.
Yeah, maybe. We interviewed someone who has been isolated previously in their life and still is a loner today. He is comparable to the monkeys. How does isolation change your actions towards others and your emotions?
I would say it changes my actions because while I want to have friends, I don't want to actually put myself around other people because the way they act around you is just not really worth it, I suppose. And when they isolate you, you kind of isolate yourself at the same time because you just kind of want to be away from everyone when they treat you like that.
What did you do when all this was happening?
I basically like just keep to myself even more, and I just don't open up. Like I keep everything to myself. Everyone in school thinks I'm pretty much like a loner because I always just walk off, do my own thing, walk ahead of everybody, and disregard everything
Why?
because it's all kind of irrelevant.
And when was this?
Well, I've always pretty much been a loner, but like in terms of the whole bullying and isolation thing, it all happened around middle and elementary. Some kids, usually like it was always a big circle of people, meaning that they all knew each other, but it never happened at the same time where they're all around. Like take like 40 people that know each other and they're all part of this huge circle, and they basically all treated me like I was weird. And that happened with some of my friends too, because the way it was is we were different, and I don't know what goes through their heads to want to just point that out. But that's pretty much it. They just pointed out like things about you to like try to make you feel bad, I guess.
Did this make you more hostile toward other people?
Eventually, I guess I could say that, yeah.
Do you remember
Like,
any specific things you felt?
Alright, when it first happens, you kind of feel really sad inside because you don't want people judging you like that. But after a while, if you're not willing to put up with it, you get really angry about it, and you're just not going to be able to put up with it. So you're probably going to snap on them.
Although the interviewee didn't experience anything life-threatening that involved being isolated, this can unfortunately happen.
The person being isolated could either kill themselves out of depression or become a threat to society by killing others.
In Albert Camus' The Stranger, the main character, Merceau, faces a tragic death which was caused by not being able to form relationships with others. The interviewee and Merceau both lack emotion in evident ways. Their failure to express emotion is a contributing factor to their isolation.
Yeah, I do think isolation is not good. It's a form of torture when they put you in an isolated place. It's torture. People are not, we're not physiologically built to be alone. Human beings need each other. A story. I have a kid who he was 17, 18, where he really, this was a couple of years ago, he really had learned to isolate something fierce and kind of denied all his feelings of needing to be with other people, etc., etc. It was really sad. He chose to depress big time over this. He wasn't very much involved in school. What he did is he got into, as you would suppose, video games and reading. Those are the two things. But and the video games were with himself too. It wasn't like this Xbox and playing with people around the world. And what happened was, little by little, he got more and more depressed. And he finally was able to talk about it. And the bottom line was, he was just really afraid to kind of be with anybody in a friendship way, in a boyfriend-girlfriend way. He just didn't want to because he was afraid that he was going to be hurt. And that thing kind of pushed him to isolate. He built a wall around himself, hung out with mommy and daddy, but that's not enough. He constantly did, but that's not enough because that's not socialization. He isolated himself and he became more and more and more depressed. That's my story.
The ability to form relationships with others is one of the most important abilities to have.
Imagine that you couldn't form any relationships with anyone. Think of your life without friends.
Merceau didn't seem very alone though. He went on dates and was even asked by a girl if he wanted to marry her.
But the thing is, Merceau didn't get pleasure or enjoyment from being with others. He didn't seem to care at all.
Yeah, which led to his demise.
Well, not really. The murder that Merceau committed led to that.
Do you think he murdered someone because he couldn't feel happy?
He never expressed how he felt until after the murder.
In a way,
That's
he
my
isolated
story.
himself.
No, it's not that. He doesn't seem to have known what was going on around him.
That prevented him from forming any relationships with people.
Which is just like criminals today, right?
Yeah, but again, not everyone who's isolated is a criminal.
Well, I would like to point out something because we're talking about criminals. A lot of criminals aren't actually isolated, but could feelings of isolation be present in someone through different means?
Charles Whitman was a child prodigy who was considered to be perfect. He had an IQ of 139, and he broke many Boy Scout records that still exist today. He was abused by his father as a child, and an instance where he was almost drowned by his father caused him to be a very depressed child and abuse drugs as an adult.
Torture.
His father was also very abusive toward his mother. When the two separated because his mother couldn't handle the abuse, Charles Whitman felt sorry that he couldn't have a better relationship with his father and thought of himself as useless. During this stressful time for him, he wouldn't talk to his wife, sister, or mother. He wrote a journal of his feelings called The Daily Record of Charles Whitman, where he expressed how he felt disconnected from the world. The amphetamine drugs that he abused drove him insane. That is when he went on his reign of terror and became one of the most famous serial killers of all time.
Charles Whitman killed his wife and mother, and questions his actions afterwards. He was supposed to be an average, reasonable, and intelligent young man. However, lately, I cannot recall when it started, I have been a victim of many unusual and irrational thoughts.
He's also known as the Tower Sniper. He followed the motto,
"One shot, one kill."
he would never shoot at someone twice. His first kill was on Claire Wilson, an 18-year-old anthropology student who was 8 months pregnant. She was shot in the abdomen, which killed her unborn child. Her body fell right next to her fiancé on the concrete, making an unforgettable clot. The blood spurted out, and it was lost with all the hopes and dreams that the couple had. Their future was just beginning, and it was decimated.
Being in the military for a few years, Whitman had a lot of experience. The cops weren't able to suppress him until he killed 16 people and wounded 32 others. The event was described as a mass shooting rampage.
I don't know what to say to that.
Even though he wasn't isolated, he isolated himself in his own thoughts. The stress put on him because of his parents caused him to overthink. He could barely sleep at night because he couldn't stop thinking about it. He closed himself in from his society and his own thoughts. No one was able to tell.
Isolation is a peculiar phenomenon that causes some to be dramatically different.
Almost anyone can be affected by it.
Such as Charles Whitman, or even fictional characters such as Merceau.
In the end, serious prolonged isolation will always lead to serious negative consequences.
Even across species, the effects are still similar. The Pit of Despair experiment proved that rhesus macaque monkeys behave the same way as humans when isolated, though on a much larger scale.
The monkeys acted surprisingly similar to the strangers Merceau.
Just like the monkeys, Merceau couldn't form sexual relations with other people.
But for the monkeys, they weren't able to form sexual relations with others after being isolated, which leaves me to infer that Merceau was isolated prior to the events in the story. He even mentioned that he used to possess emotions, but lost them.
So that means isolation literally breaks all positive emotions.
There are some people who prefer solitude,
but no one
who can completely withstand it.
Thank you for listening to KB Radio. This has been Clement Gendler,
David Santo,
and Nicholas Hawk Crandall.
We hope you enjoyed the podcast.
Ravioli?
That's my story.